Hachi attacked Matose, and he said Matose shuffled very slowly, and he grabbed his nipple and pinched it and twisted it and dropped him to his feet, hit him on the head. He says, "See, I'm an old man, and I still move faster than you."
Welcome to the Martial Theory Podcast.
Tony, thanks so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate it.
Yep.
I've known you now about 25 years,
Yeah,
but I
close
know
to that.
your history in the arts and mine goes back farther than that. But why don't we start with a brief description of your background, your history, where you started, and where you got to where you are now?
Sure. So, like a lot of people in our generation, kung fu theater and the ninja craze back in the early 80s was really big. So I grew up with Bruce Lee movies and, kung fu theater on Sundays.
Yeah.
And as a kid that was probably 9, 10 years old, I was constantly bugging my parents I want to do karate or I want to learn to be a ninja or whatever. And so it was just shy of turning 11. My father was a contractor, and a lot of the guys that worked for him, concrete workers, framers, etc. A few of them were training with this guy in downtown Schenectady. The guy's name was David Tanner. And he was kind of like this underground fighter. Like I didn't know this at the time, but he taught these guys out of this old abandoned church. So if I was like, I got a place we can go, you can start doing karate. Because that's all he did was karate, but it wasn't a mix of things. So I was 11, or going on 11. Then the next oldest person was 16. And then it was all adult contractors, like strong masons and some skinny kid, 11 years old. So I got beat up a lot. So like my first couple of weeks in the class, I basically told my father, like, I don't know if I want to do this. It's safe for editing for the film, but he basically said, BS, you're doing this and you're going to follow through on it. You've been bugging me. And so he kept me in. And that was my first introduction to the martial arts. And that guy ended up having to shut his school down after about a year and a half because he just didn't have enough people to afford the rent.
Yeah.
It was an old school kind of training. It was an old abandoned church. Nobody was there anymore. And just him and about 8 guys that would train.
Right.
And I took a break from that. I did a real brief period of time doing like some Western boxing and judo. Not enough to really put that into my wheelhouse of things I did, a month or 2 of that as a kid. Then I started my formal martial arts training at 15 in the Serrada Escrima lineage of Kempo. After that, I met, and I'd played around with some things here and there, but I'd met my current Kempo teacher, Bruce Judnick, in 1994. And that was a life-changing point for me. So I started becoming a student of Kosho-Ryu Kempo. The things that Judnick Hachi taught were things I'd never seen or heard before. I'd been a martial artist for over a decade, and it was like starting over. It was like being a kindergartner and then talking to a college professor. And so his introduction and teaching me the things that really kind of resonated with me as what the martial arts should be. Through him, I also learned the Filipino martial arts. And then in 2001, I met my Aikijujitsu instructor, Roy Goldberg Sensei. And he was at a contemporary of mine in the Kosho-Ryu system at his school. And he had Hachi and him teaching together with Carl Long Sensei of Aishin-Ryu, who was my sword teacher for a period of time. I met Goldberg Sensei, saw what he did, was absolutely blown away, and then eased my way into doing Daito-Ryu. So Goldberg Sensei and Hachi Judnick are my 2 primary influences in the martial arts. And obviously, you and I have met, and we've met a lot of martial artists in our time. So there's many other practitioners who've had a big influence or impact on me, but no one that I would call my direct teacher.
Let's talk about Kosho a little bit. People can check out the lineage of Kosho and so forth online. That's available. Kosho, I don't want to say has a depth necessarily that other arts don't have, but I would say that there are aspects of Kosho for sure that are not seen as visibly in other arts, even though there might be a potential therefore.
Yeah.
What is that root in Kosho that makes it different than a lot of what we see in terms of other contemporary styles of it. I don't mean contemporary styles in the sense of,
Well, like maybe within
Being at the same time.
maybe within the Kempo,
sure,
and that's actually probably the best way to put it, because I'm on the same page as you. A lot of people and people within my own system, I used to catch them at open seminars speaking about while teaching Kosho as if we were unique to anybody else. And I've been in the arts long enough and crossed hands with enough highly skilled practitioners that universal principles are universal principles. People that do good martial arts and study good conceptually based arts with a solid foundation in what martial arts should be are doing the same art. The thing that Kosho-Ryu, I think, has maybe over some other arts is really a byproduct of Bruce Judnick. Okay. So the Kempo that I do, the Kosho-Ryu that I do, even though the lineage comes from James Matose, who basically anybody doing Kempo in the United States, unless it's a like Daito-Ryu Kempo or Okinawan Kempo, is doing a Kempo lineage through Matose. Matose taught 5 individuals in Hawaii. Those individuals, one primary person, William Chow, was responsible for a huge outreach of Kempo systems that developed over time. Matose, the way he taught, and he was a very controversial figure, and anybody that wants to do research can find information online about him. But the way Judnick Hachi explained it, his meeting with Matose, and that meeting also can be looked up online. My teacher studied Kempo, the Tracy and Parker lineage Kempo, for probably a decade before he met Matose. And when he met Matose, the short and long of it, Matose said, everything you know about Kempo is BS. And so, of course, Hachi was like, he went there to compare notes with this guy, with Matose. And so he asked Hachi to show his best Kempo technique, punch at me or hit me. And where they were, you can't really do that. But somehow it was allowed. Matose was in prison. And the details people can look that up on their own. But Hachi attacked Matose, and he said, Matose shuffled very slowly, and he grabbed his nipple and pinched it and twisted it and dropped him to his feet, hit him on the head. He says, see, I'm an old man, and I still move faster than you. But he didn't move fast. So in that one moment, Hachi understood that this guy did something to him that he couldn't understand. How he was able to drop him with a simple pinch made no sense. And so Matose taught Hachi things because of the environment they're in. He couldn't do physical exercises as much as he would normally do. He taught things conceptually and constantly made Hachi look at things through a lens that he had to figure and almost self-teach himself about what Kempo was. So the language in Kosho-Ryu was created by Hachi, like things like skeletal freezing and leaning factor and string theory. Those are all things that he used to communicate the lessons he got from Matose. And Hachi was a very conceptual-based teacher. So he would make people study not just the physical technique of doing art, but how the body has to operate and how an opponent's body has to operate within the space that's involved for them to make a technique happen or to do something with. So he really made me understand the connection between the Torei and the Uge and examine how the body works so that you could understand it. So it wasn't just learning an ABCD technique. I guess some throw punch stand there. He made it more live. You had to understand that environment. So that's where his teaching methodology was different from a lot of other practitioners that I met in the Kempo. And really have to give Hachi credit for that, because Matose spoke broken English and couldn't do a lot of physical activity. So Hachi had to kind of take those teachings and figure things out.
Let me seize upon something you said, because it's a good entry point to start to understand the depth of the Kosho. And as I say in the book, look, there are some people who are not interested as much in the conceptual side of the arts. They want to get out there and do the physical, and more power to them, right? But that's not this discussion. So you talked about how Matose moved slower. And in martial theory, I quote Tom Bisio, said, the faster you move, the slower I move. One of my observations of Kosho is the application of that principle a great deal. Good Kosho practitioners are moving less and they're moving more slowly often, except for certain moments potentially, but moving more slowly than an opponent. What's the foundation in Kosho for being able to do that?
Well, it's interesting. One of the first questions Matose asked Hachi was, I said, Bruce, what's more important, how to move or when to move? So Hachi had to think about it. And eventually he said, Matose, like, it's when to move. So it's timing. And in any arena of combat, you understand that that's integral. The timing of when you execute a movement. You watch a boxing match with George Foreman in the old days. He was a big guy. He'd throw his jab, it'd be like this fast, but he was relaxed. He would time it so perfectly that he'd always land that jab. So the foundation, what we call that in the study in Kosho-Ryu, is called debana no waza. The debana no waza basically is studying the understanding of anticipation of movement. So what takes place in the body and what happens to create movement and where the movement has to go from point A to point B. So by understanding that, if I know how you have to move to get to me, where your weight has to shift, how your body has to either rise, fall, twist, turn, if I can interrupt that movement at any point during that process, it gives me more time. And how I position myself based on where I am in accordance to where you are and how your center has to come to me, it also gives me an advantage. So we call it debana no waza, or reading and understanding the anticipation of movement, how movement has to take place.
And that's interesting because I don't think it's going a stretch to say that a high percentage of martial artists, and some senior, but certainly as we're developing in the martial arts, we're responding more to the end of the person's motion, right? We are blocking the punch once the punch has manifested and taken form and almost completed itself.
Yeah.
That's when people are blocking that punch or they're dodging that punch or what have you. So Kosho works on intercepting that motion or responding to that motion if it's not an interception earlier in that process. That's an accurate way of
I think so, and you put it perfectly. So in the martial arts world, so many people pay attention to the beginning of the movement and the end of the movement, and all the good stuff happens in the middle,
right?
Like all of the micro adjustments in the body and the things that are happening to make sure that we're executing movement properly have to happen in that space between point A and point B. So by understanding that, if you can pinpoint, like I said, the beginning of the movement, before they're even able to finish the movement, you've already disrupted anything that they can do before they get to that point. You can also move where they can finish the movement, but put yourself in a position where they now have to reset the body, which gives you more time again, because now they have to start over. So yeah, that's pretty accurate, is that we spend a lot of time reading the opponent's posture and position and kamae. So kamae is in the layman's term of the Japanese translation is posture or position.
Yeah.
But it's beyond that. It's attitude. It's like the overall expression of how you're moving, what you're moving.
I always understood it as expression of self,
Right.
Total, not self, who you are,
Right.
but total self as what you are, right? Your body, everything that's being expressed, the totality.
Right. Right. So most people from a physical standpoint, kamae is your posture and like the position. So like with a forward energy, my kamae is into you. But it's an attitude too, right? Because if you don't have a proper mental attitude, then your kamae will be off. So we read kamae, we read posture. Like I know in order for you to stand up from that chair, you have to, because your feet are already in, your body will have to move forward so you can get your skeletal structure over your feet in order to stand up. Like you to try to stand up from this position without bringing your center forward. So you change your posture from here to get your base set so you can stand up. And in Kosho, if I don't want you to stand up, I'll just put something in the way so that you can't create that motion. So it's a silly exercise, but it's really making you understand anatomy and positioning to stop somebody from being able to move and effectively be combative against you.
Yeah, one of the ways I demonstrate this to my students, and I'm not a Kosho practitioner, this is my own manifestation of what I would consider to be a similar principle, is that, let's say someone goes to strike. If you merely put a hand in their way, not to strike them with it, but as an obstruction, right? It often interrupts their entire process.
Sure.
Because that obstruction was not considered by them in the process of their attack. And is that an accurate, for lack of a better word, example or an accessible example to what Kosho is doing with respect to?
Yeah, I think so. And actually, the best example that I can give of that in a everyday kind of situation, which we've all experienced, is when you're walking towards somebody and you're both on that same path, and you both go to move in the same direction, and you do this. So we meet, and then one body starts to move, but instead of you going in the opposite direction, we both go, and then you get that kind of stutter step,
Right?
That disruption in energy.
I love that example.
Yeah.
I'm going to steal it.
Yeah, well, but that's exactly what you're saying, is that if you pull back to hit me and I just put my hand up, it disrupts. You're not thinking about just hitting me anymore. There's now something that's been put in front of you as an obstacle that your whole body has to adjust to now. So you may swat my hand down and hit, but now you're doing an extra movement that you weren't initially planning on. Once the initiation of movement starts, once I pull back to throw a punch at you, I'm not thinking about, I'm going to punch Steve, but there's a possibility that Steve's going to block my punch. So I have to be ready to pak-sow or lop-sow and hit him. I may not be thinking that. So then that's where the training kicks in, because nobody just punches and you intercept that and I automatically check you. If my body's not trained to deal with that kind of energy in an active environment, my body won't respond that way. Not necessarily, not in a correct manner. I might bring my hands up, but I'm not going to respond in a effectively combative response to your counter to my movement. So yeah, so the walking toward each other and the stutter steps that we make is an example of that disruption. It's the same thing as when you're walking downstairs and you go to take that extra step that's not there, and you stutter too. So your body's prepping itself for what you think is coming, but that's not what happens. And in the combative world, it happens all the time, right?
Right.
If you go into a situation combatively with a plan, then inevitably your plan will be foiled. If you don't have a plan, but your body knows, you can just respond, right? So, you're an educated individual. You do a lot of speaking engagements. You have a lot of conversations with people. That in itself is an art. So you have the skill set to be able to debate and talk with people and move in different directions within a conversation because of your skill. Now, if you didn't have that and you didn't have a good vocabulary, a thesaurus mind where you know multiple words to use one example, you couldn't navigate a conversation the same way you do. Martial arts is the same way. And I teach most of the martial arts that I teach. I use the grammar analogy. Like first you learn the letters, then you make them into words, then the words become sentences. And once you've understood the base grammatical understanding of the martial arts, then you start telling stories. And at a high level, it becomes poetry or advanced writing. Yeah, it's just like learning a language. It's conversational. Like for you and I to have a conversation, if we cross hands, we need to be able to have the same conversation through touch.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good way of understanding that disruption of energy is that once something changes, the whole body's thrown off.
One of the points I referenced in the book is the idea of creating the future for the opponent, right? Time traveling. And that's what I see Kosho doing when it does those interruptions, right? A person's beginning a motion that they expect is going to end at a certain point, which is also therefore a certain point in time. But you get there a little first.
Sure.
But let's stay on this for a second, because we could talk about all the Kosho principles, but we'd have to be here for a while.
Yeah, a couple of weeks.
Yeah. But what's interesting, though, is that if people hearing you talking about this, I'm sure they're going to watch your demonstrations, but they're hearing you talking about this. And they haven't seen Kosho. They might think, well, Kosho therefore must have this different cadre of techniques, practices that my art doesn't have. And if you watch Kosho, it's doing the same kind of blocks and the same strikes, that we see in, as you said, across the Kempo spectrum,
Mhm.
let's say, for example. Doesn't look like an eagle claw a lot, but right across the Kempo spectrum. So something there is happening differently because it's using what is effectively, for lack of a better term, the same motions, right? But it's not using them the same way. And what's the distinction, therefore, in its application of the same motions? And I ask this in part for people who are in the other Kempo arts or maybe in some of the similar arts, who are thinking, well, I could never, therefore, employ what Kosho does unless I go out and study Kosho, which would be the best way to learn a lot of that, of course.
Mhm.
But a lot of it's already within their practice or accessible within their practice. But what is, therefore, Kosho doing differently, given that it's the same motor movements, it's the same gross techniques, it's the same shapes, right? But it's not.
Right.
So,
So it comes down to training methodology. So what's the end goal for the training? So we have to learn structure. So stance work, body position. You have to learn proper striking methods, and then how the anatomy should be forming those strikes, kicking, footwork, all of those things. So within Kosho-Ryu, we do more drilling of those movements and practicing those basics over and over again to develop the body skill of throwing a punch correctly, of moving offline correctly, keeping your balance and your body position proper and aligned when you're dealing with somebody, rather than doing a preset number of like technique 1, technique 2, technique 3, where you have a set number of movements to deal with a specific attack. Like you throw a punch, I step off, I do an upper block, I do a reverse punch, I do a front kick. So a lot of the martial systems, especially within the Kempo world, have that as a framework. And one thing that my teacher said to me is that if you're not fighting your art and doing your art the way the art is taught and not separating them into specific categories. In other words, you'll watch, and you'll see this across the board in a lot of martial arts systems. So if you go to a tournament like back in the day when Ed Parker had his big tournament in California, you know what I'm talking
yeah,
about.
I know.
I know. For some reason,
Like
it's escaping me. But anyways, those tournaments where you watch the Kempo fighters fight, they didn't look that different from the other martial arts systems fighting. They all were, using body positioning and punching. They weren't doing the techniques that you see them do in this system. They weren't doing 5 swords in a kumite match.
Right.
So then the question becomes, how do you properly train your art to effectively deploy the movements that you're learning that are supposed to be the foundational movements for your art and use them combatively against somebody who's resisting you, rather than an opponent who's throwing a punch and standing there as a target for you to deploy. And people will use the BS excuse like, well, our art's too deadly to fight, so that's why we practice it like this. Like, well, you can't say that because the test of that was when the UFC came out, right? So there was guys that did deadly arts and they were getting annihilated by judo and jiu-jitsu guys because that was a game that they didn't understand.
Yeah.
They didn't use ground fighting. So they were getting taken down. So now you're dealing with a real environment and those techniques have now become useless, right? So Kosho really is more about training and understanding of movement, motion, and body position, and then exploiting the weaknesses of our opponent through those processes. So I can learn to do an inward block and a reverse punch, but when and where I contact the person with that inward block and then how I execute the reverse punch is the difference between how we deploy it in Kosho and how you might see it in other Kempo systems is catching that person. So I tell people, and this is across the board for every art I teach, Kosho-Ryu to Filipino arts to Daito-Ryu. The minute that I touch you, and even before then, I want your kazushi. And kazushi literally means a disruption of structure. It could be a crumbling of structure. It's not just taking someone's balance. It's literally destroying structure. So I want to upset your structure to a point where your whole system becomes weak. So whatever you're trying to attempt to get through to attack me or hurt me, I've now basically nullified.
This is something that they talk about a lot in the classical literature of arts. And it's something that I think got lost a bit in modern times, in part because of TV. So a lot of people started seeing martial art kung fu theater, right? For example, or Bruce Lee movies.
Mm-hmm.
What people saw was that the culmination of the technique was the technique,
Right.
right? The end motion
Mm-hmm.
is what the technique was. When in classical literature, they talk much more about the formation of the technique than the culmination of the technique. Culmination of technique is almost irrelevant.
Right.
And I'm going to connect that to another point, which is relevant, and I'll see if I can articulate it, which is that, as you somewhat articulated here, but I've heard you talk about before, and you'll admit that it's not a total truth, but kosher doesn't teach technique as much, right? It teaches process. It teaches live engagement, as opposed to, as you said, this combination 7 and then combination 43, right? But that, again, is not about the culmination of the technique. That's about the formation of the technique and the process.
Right.
And I see this as something that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I see this as something that's common through the 3 arts that you practice.
No doubt.
Okay. So in the Filipino art, certainly, while there is technique, it's really about the process. It's about the flow and interruptions of the flow, et cetera.
Yep.
And Daito-Ryu is really all about, I don't want to distill it down to one simple thing, right? But it's about the body, having the body to be able to interrupt somebody's process. The particular technique that you accomplish in Daito-Ryu is not as important as...
Right, it's irrelevant.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, and that's a really good point, Steve. And I think a lot of people see demonstrations of an art like Daito-Ryu or Aikijujitsu arts, and they're beautiful techniques. And the reality is those techniques are not realistic in a combative realm. So they often get crapped on publicly, like on those websites like Bullshido and stuff, because it's unrealistic looking. And I agree 100% with them.
No
like
question
some of
about
the techniques that I do as a demonstration are not combative. The process of understanding the connection, the disruption in your opponent, and being able to maintain that to accomplish a technique is what we're working on. So, like, I don't like using the word chi or aiki. I don't talk about that anymore. And people are constantly like, and I want to develop the aiki body, or I want to learn aiki. And I'm like, what I teach through the great teachers that I have is a development of body awareness skill. And because I know guys that do internal arts, and that's another thing. I hate the word internal arts.
Yeah.
Because I've worked with people who are external practitioners who have far more developed internal body skills than guys that just do internal arts that have nothing. So, you can't say I do an internal art and then you touch somebody and you feel right away when you touch their body, this person does not have skill. They don't have what they proclaim to have. It only works with the people that cooperate with them or that they train with. But then you'll work with somebody who doesn't do internal arts and you touch hands with them and you're like, whoa, this guy's structure's like on point. They've got my balance as soon as they touch me. This guy doesn't do internal arts, but he is definitely doing something internal to me. So I teach body awareness skill development. I don't teach Aiki. I don't teach Chi or internal movement, but all of that is part of what I teach. So you could say that I do internal arts as well as external arts, but it's all the same thing.
Yeah.
It's all under the same umbrella. So I don't want to be one of those guys like, well, I'm superior because I do internal arts. No, man, I've been training for a long time, and the progression of my art, and when I say my art, I mean my personal art, not just the arts that I practice, is a development of more understanding of connecting my body to everything that I do, not just martially, but everything that I do. And that is a byproduct of what my teachers have given me. So anything that I do that people like or appreciate, they have to give credit to my teachers. I mean, yes, I was the guy studying, but they're the ones that gave me that information and passed it on. Anything that you don't like that I do, that falls on me. I'm just a bad representation of my teachers in that case.
Before we continue, just a quick reminder that if you want to see our guests demonstrating the theory they discuss here on the podcast, then join us at Martial Theory University by going to martialtheoryandthelletteru.com and make sure that you use the coupon code MTPodcast for 20% off while it lasts. Also, if you're enjoying thinking theoretically here, or even if you just enjoy thinking at all, and you want to learn more about it for your career, as a parent, or just for your own development, then please visit my Substack, Perlman Actual Intelligence, for tips, instruction, and discussion on critical thinking. Just go to Substack, Perlman Actual Intelligence.
I think you touched on something that I was actually, when I interviewed Bill Luciano about this, that we got into this discussion a little bit. And for me, it's one of the defining characteristics of martial artists, of good martial artists. That there's a difference between someone who does martial arts and someone who's a martial artist.
Yes.
And the distinction for me is how much have you internalized into your body, into your martial body, your martial being, right? You're no longer somebody who can pull off a particular technique.
Right.
You're somebody who acts martially, and you're going to act martially when that confrontation happens. You don't know what you're going to do, and it almost doesn't matter what you do. You're going to embody martialness in that context. And I think that's in a way what you're describing. It might not be the only differential. I think it's a key one. But I would ask you, tell us a little bit about your other two arts very briefly.
Okay, so through my Kosho-Ryu teacher, through the Hachi jumping. Actually, I'll preface this actually. But my first time studying the Filipino arts was with the first guy I trained with, Dave Tanner. And unbeknownst to me, as an 11-year-old, I was doing Pakita Kali. I had no idea. We were just doing Kali stuff, and I only trained with the guy for a year. So the stuff that I did, I didn't know what it was. I knew it as Kali Silat because his instructor was from New York City, and he trained with Tuangahe. But none of this I knew. So the funny thing is, I have some friends of mine who are pretty well-established Pakita Kali guys, Tuhans and Matas Nagurus. And I tell them, like, jokingly, like, I was studying Pakita before you even knew what it was. I didn't know what it was. But so I have no formal training in Pakita. I just like to tell people that because that was really my first introduction. Without knowing what the Filipino arts was, that was my first introduction to Filipino arts. And then when I met Hachi, because I had played around with stick fighting in the Valari organization, but it was nothing that was had any substance to it. When I met Hachi as a Kosho-Ryu guy, I had no idea that he was a Filipino arts practitioner. He was the first white guy to train in Stockton with Angel Cabalas. So he started training with Cabalas, ironically, through his buddy Paz Fidel, who was first cousins with Guru Dan and Santo. And so Guru Dan called Paz and Hachi and said, hey, you guys got to come to Stockton and train with this guy that's teaching down here. He's great. And that person was Angel Cabalas. So had it not been for Guru Dan, Hachi wouldn't have had his introduction to the Filipino arts in Stockton. So there he trained in Cabalas' system, worked with Angel Cabalas and Dentoy Revelar, met guys like Max Sarmiento, all the big name guys in the Stockton crew. And then he met a guy named Remy Prezes. And he met Professor Prezes in the late 70s. And his first meeting with Professor was eye-opening for him because he essentially challenged Professor. He said, hey, you want to play a little bit? And that language back then was, you want to fight? And so Hachi's story was, Professor looked at Hachi and he's like, he goes, you show me what you do. Or no, he's asked him to see what he did first. Hachi showed him everything that he does and then said to Professor, do you want to play? So Professor pushed his glass up, was sure. And just annihilated Hachi, beat him to death. And so at that point, Hachi became a student of Professor Prezes. And he was actually the person responsible getting Professor Prezes out there teaching seminars. Because this was in the late 70s and 80s before he really became well known as this modern artist guy. So my Filipino arts training started with Hachi and with his senior people. So I ended up getting ranked in his lineage of Serrada, as well as some of the fundamental things he did in what was really called Numerato Arnis or Prezes Arnis. But I'm more of a Serrada guy than I am a modern guy. and I've played with other Filipino art systems. So that was my introduction to Filipino arts. And you have to understand, my expression of Filipino arts is very Kosho-like, because my teacher is my Kosho teacher. So Hachi's expression of Serrada has a lot of the same concepts and principles that he teaches within Kosho-Ryu. So our expression of Serrada is a little bit different than some of the classical, I guess, orthodox schools of Serrada Escrima.
But I would say this, not obviously I'm not a Serrada instructor, but have a background. But it would seem to me that, and you can tell me if I'm way off base, but I think that if you're going to adopt one of the Filipino systems to a Kosho-like presence, Serrada lends itself in certain ways to that maybe some other Filipino systems do not. But could you tell me why?
Yeah, well, I think, partially because Serrada, it has a lot of back and forth,
right? And
there's a lot of live movement, and it's in a Spadi daga based system. So it's a long bladed short blade, or dagger and long blade system. So both hands are doing things, and it's, even though it works all ranges, it's mostly a medial and corto range.
Yeah.
So it's medium range and close range.
Usually they end up tighter.
Right, exactly. And it's very fast.
Yeah.
And it's exploiting your opponent's body position and moves. Again, there's other Filipino arts that do that for sure.
All Filipino.
Yeah.
But we're talking about a particular
right. And I think that's kind of what drew Hachi to Serrada. Because he was training with Matose at the same time that he was training with Caballas and training with Professor Prezes. And he told me a story about how Matose would say, they would constantly ask what the other guy was doing. But Matose said something to the effect, he's like, oh, well, that okay, but Japanese stick fighting much more superior. So, he was talking about, his understanding of how to apply the concepts to stick fighting. Matose never taught Hachi anything that involved weaponry-based stuff, but it was all the conceptual stuff. And that's just their way of so Remy would be like, oh, well, show me what he showed you. And I believe, and I might be wrong, and some modern Arnese people might shit on me for saying this, but the sombrada back and forth drill, the shadowing drill, right?
Yeah.
Came to Hachi through Caballas. I think that Hachi showed Professor that drill. And so the people in modern Arnese that might be doing sombrada or a version of sombrada can trace that back to Bruce Judnick. That's my belief. I might be wrong, but
this podcast neither affirms nor denies any of that.
Right.
Yeah. But let's go back to the through line here. And again, we could establish many through lines. We're talking about one, and maybe in another podcast down the road, we'll talk about another. But we're seeing this, this interruption process. We're seeing this use of body structure and angle, right? As from Kosho translating or present through your Serrada.
Mm-hmm.
So now talk to me about Daito-Ryu.
Okay, so that's the thing that drew me to Daito-Ryu, other than just Roy Goldberg's personality, because Sensei is really, he's got a big personality, as you know.
Yeah.
And I met him when he really had a big personality.
He was hardcore.
Yeah, he's much more soft now.
Yeah.
Both his technique, but also his expression of energy. And I think that just comes with, as you get older in life, and he's had a lot of different life experiences that have come to that.
I don't know. Some people get older and they get crotchier.
Right. That's
He
true.
didn't.
No, he didn't. He softened up. I think experience has a lot to do with that too. So, and I'm a firm believer that age has nothing to do with it. It's life experience, right? Because you and I both know people who are very immature, ridiculous, older people, and we know some very, very together younger people. So the age thing is really not indicative of knowledge, in my opinion.
It's not.
But anyway, so when I met Goldberg Sensei and I first saw him do his techniques, being someone who was a student of Kosho-Ryu and has studied a lot of different martial arts, I had to subdue the part of my brain that was saying, come on.
Yeah.
Give me really? But I was intrigued. So I had to feel it. So I asked him, and I grabbed him, and I felt it. And he was the first person at that time that I had touched that could control my body and eliminate my ability to do anything to him effectively.
Yeah.
Other than my Kosho-Ryu teachers, the senior guys that I studied with in Kosho-Ryu, including Hanshi, obviously. So right away, I was like, this guy's unbelievable. But the irony is, I had a friend of mine who was an Aikido practitioner, who who you may have met, who you may have been seeing recently.
Sorry.
And he was having a kind of a rift with his organization at the time. And I'm like, this Roy Goldberg guy would be perfect for my friend. He's looking to kind of continue training. So my intentions initially were to introduce my friend who was an Aikido practitioner, the Goldberg sensei. So he had, I met this guy, Roy Goldberg, does Aikijujitsu. It's unbelievable. So I had him in for a seminar with the intention to get this person to kind of link into. Well, that didn't kind of pan out, but in the process, I got hooked. And I was really adamant about training. And it took a while with Sensei. It took a while for him to trust me because I won't get into it, but there were birds in his ear about who I was, and I studied Kosho-Ryu.
Yeah.
Would I really be true to Daito and this and that?
Well, he's had a lot of students who have purported to be as
Absolutely
dedicated and then we're not.
Absolutely, which we've all experienced. We've all experienced that. So I understood. So he was very cautious with me. So it really was training with Sensei in the early days. Really felt like that guy who sat outside the Shaolin Temple waiting to get allowed into the gate.
Yeah.
And then eventually he said to me, like, you seem pretty serious about Daito-Ryu. And I'm like, yeah, I am. I want to train. And so at that point, he's like, look, I'm looking for a few individuals that I want to make study groups. And so I became an official study group of senseis around 2005, 2006. And that was after meeting him in 2001. So it took 4 years before he actually considered me a student of his. I had the guy in for seminars. I went to see him 4 years before he's like, all right, you seem like you want to train. And had it not been for Kosho-Ryu, I don't think I would have understood or had the learning curve that I had in Daito-Ryu. And the two arts have influenced each other dramatically.
Let me hold you there.
Yeah.
I want to hear that, but I want to hear first, what is Daito-Ryu? And people who look at it, and you can see some videos of Goldberg Sensei.
Yes.
As you said, it does look like bullshit.
Yeah, oh, sure.
Yeah, and if you don't grab them, you don't understand.
Right.
But that's also always showing the highest Aiki level of it, as opposed to the basic jujitsu level of it, which looks like more like jujitsu. It's really good looking jujitsu. What's Daito-Ryu? What's Aiki?
Okay. What's Aiki? I can't tell you. I can't. I think
that's fair.
Well, there's a lot of people that purport or try to give what their understanding of what Aiki is. Aiki is beyond what Aiki literally means, a harmonizing of energy, right?
Right.
Or a connection to energy. Like Aiki between you and I, like I connect to you. We become one. But it's getting rid of any excess, unnecessary things within the body to be as effective in what you do and have as quiet a body to make it happen. Meaning that you get rid of all excess tension in the body and everything's working like a well-oiled machine together, the body in concert. So if you and I touch each other, I'll feel soft, yet I'll feel extremely powerful. It'll permeate through your body.
Well, I'm going to add to your definition of Aiki, or at least postulate it a little differently. And you can tell me if I'm wrong, but because people who are listening to this are going to hear that and think that it's looseness.
Right. It's not.
It's not. It's fullness.
Right.
Right. It's fullness.
Yes.
But it's
that's why
it's relaxation.
Right. Aiki and Chi, or internal arts, are so hard to communicate using words, because you'll use a word and that's not necessarily what it is. So that's why those arts really have to be taught by someone who understands, or at least has a level of understanding, to be able to give that skill to someone. Because I could say you need to relax more, but relaxing isn't necessarily it.
Not in the English connotation.
Right. You need to get rid of where the strength is in the wrong part of your body and connect it to something so this feels pliable but very powerful. And we used to refer to it as steel wrapped in cotton. So like Goldberg Sensei's teacher, Kiyama Shihan. The first time I grabbed him, that felt like steel wrapped in cotton because he was explosively powerful, but I didn't feel what I was grabbing. I just felt this energy come through me. So yeah, so Aiki or Daito-Ryu. First of all, I should preface this, and this is also going to be controversial. The same thing I would equate to Kosho-Ryu. Both of these arts, Kosho-Ryu and Daito-Ryu, profess to be hundreds of years old, in some cases 1,200 years old. But, and this is just my opinion, I challenge anybody to give me documentation that Daito-Ryu, as it's practiced today, in the different branches that it's practiced today, goes anywhere beyond Sukaku Takeda. So I really think what we see as Daito-Ryu today is a product of Takeda Sensei's training. Because Takeda Sensei was illiterate, so he couldn't read, he couldn't write, he had no Menkyo licenses in anything that he did. And he was a master swordsman. There's stories of him that he met there was like a friendly competition. There was a guy who was a license holder in a sword school, and Takeda basically told the guy, like, you're easily be defeated because you're doing this, this, and this. And the guy kind of was arrogant about it. And was like, well, you show me then. And Takeda continuously hit the guy's kote. And the rumor is that he was using Onahai Itaru to do this, Takeda Sensei. And the two schools that he trained were Shinkage-ryu and Onahai Itaru. But he's got no license. There's no documentation that he studied these arts. The same way there's no documentation that he studied Daito-Ryu Aikijujitsu, right? So you don't have written scrolls that were passed on to Takeda. Most of the techniques that people see in Daito-Ryu are techniques that his students wrote down when they watched him demonstrate techniques. Because Takeda would just do techniques. And he would tell people how to do things, like you need to do this, this, and this. But he couldn't read, so he couldn't go back to his notes and be like, well, you step out with the left foot, enter, grab, drop. And if you look at the scrolls, like the English translation to a lot of those techniques is, enter, move, turn, drop.
Right.
It's like, well, what, not grab the left hand, move your elbow in this way. So there's no real depth to.
But it is possible, isn't it, that Takeda essentially codified a lot of training that had existed for centuries.
Of course, yeah. Which is why the art is as old as it is.
Right.
But it's a product of the different things that Takeda trained. So the same way a lot of lineage holders, the arts change based on the new head or hachi or soke of that system. The Kosho-Ryu that I do today looks very different than what Matose Sensei was doing, because it's Bruce Judnick's Kosho-Ryu. Right. So it's all of the elements that were inside of his body, because he couldn't train physically with Matose the way a classical student would. He had to use what he already had.
Well, you can teach anybody to write a sonnet, but you're going to get very different sonnets.
Exactly. It's that's where the art is, right? That's the expression of his art. So the Daito-Ryu that we do, the Daito-Ryu that I came in doing through Goldberg Sensei was the Kodokai lineage from Horikawa Kodo Sensei. So Takeda taught his son, Tokumune. He taught Sagawa Sensei, Horikawa Kodo Sensei, and Shiza Takuma. Those were the four primary senior students that he taught, where you see the most prevalent branches in Daito-Ryu. So I come from the Kodokai lineage, and we broke away from that organization and then formed the Kiyama-kai. The Kiyama-kai is basically Goldberg Sensei's teacher, Kiyama Sensei. And Kiyama Sensei was a student of the Kodokai, but he also trained with Sagawa Sensei, one of the few people that from another Daito-Ryu lineage had the ability to do that, because Sagawa didn't teach anybody. So he had experience. So the expression of our Daito-Ryu is really Kiyama Sensei's expression. He did sumo, Takaneuchi Jiu-Jitsu, and judo. So that, along with his Daito-Ryu training, is what you see the primary influence.
Takaneuchi being one of the oldest recorded
Jiu-Jitsu schools.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but let me take you back now, because we got a little sidetracked. I'm glad for it, but we got a little sidetracked from your point, which was about the symmetry or the connection between Serrada and Daito
Yes.
and Kosho.
Yes.
So as best as you can explain, because I think obviously the Daito is the hardest to talk about, but what's the through line between the arts? Because they're very, if you would look at them as an onlooker and observe, you wouldn't see any of it unless you know what to look for.
Right.
What's the through line for you, at least in yourself?
But my expression of the arts, right? I see the link between the three because I train them. So like I told you that they influence each other, right? Hachi's teachings allowed me to understand things in Daito better than I probably would have if I'd not trained with him.
For example, what?
Just how to understand how the body has to move, and what things take place to learn specific skills, what you need to pay attention to in your body to develop those skills. Had Hachi not given me those teachings, I think the learning curve in Daito would have been much more difficult for me. Goldberg's teachings and what I've gotten from Daito as far as my body awareness skills and really developing the understanding of connection and being present absolutely went into my Kosho-Ryu. So when people feel me express my Kosho-Ryu, people throw a punch at me and they tell me, they're like, your Kosho feels different than other Kosho guys I've worked with.
I've observed your Kosho change since you were working with Goldberg.
Right.
I can see the difference.
Sure.
But let me change the conversation just a little bit, because you're, as a senior instructor now, and having seen you for so many years, and always respected what you did, but not everyone who trains reaches your level of skill and your level of insight. What's a turning point for you in your understanding of the arts that was pivotal, that was transitional, that was a springboard? What was a moment for you where something that you understood about the martial arts, your particular art, martial art in general, however you want to characterize it, that shifted a gear for you in terms of how you understood it or how you would train in it, or even in your physical skill?
That's a very complex question, but I'll try to give as simple an answer as I can. We're constantly changing, and you and I both know, because we're of similar generations. We get older, our bodies change.
Yeah.
We can't do the same
Well, I
thing.
mean, yours has.
Sure.
Mine.
No, you're just like you were when you're just like you were when
I know. I feel bad for you,
right?
but
No, but that's the thing, right? Is that ultimately, as martial artists, if you're doing martial arts correctly and you're living martial arts, you stay healthy.
Yeah.
You stay fit.
Yeah.
Your body's operating the way it's supposed to. Martial arts is about self-defense, right? Self-preservation. Well, that starts with your personal health. So if you're not doing that and you're not taking care of yourself, you're really not a great martial arts practitioner. You know, you might be a very skilled combatant, but you might not be someone who's living the martial arts. And I think the turning point for me was that I knew that there was a shelf life to my strength, endurance, speed. And so I had to find ways to refine my movements so that regardless of how old I got, I understood how to execute movements to give myself the advantage over the people that I might have to deal with. And that's why I study the arts that I study. I don't do Muay Thai. If I was 25 right now, I'd probably be doing MMA, and I'd probably be doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which I'm not downplaying those arts by any means, because I know plenty of people are doing them. But let's face it, the shelf life for a person who practices Muay Thai is very different than someone who does Tai Chi, right?
Well, there aren't many 60-year-old MMA champions,
right,
walking in the ring, right?
Sure,
Against the 30-year-old. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Right. So understand what it is you're doing. That's why I also don't make claims or comments like, well, you know, the stuff that I do. Somebody recently said to me, I'd love to see you like fight with one of these MMA guys. And I'm like, I get my ass kicked. And they kind of like looked at me surprised. I'm like, I'm 51 years old. I'm like, and I don't work out 4 hours a day and train in a gym, getting hit and getting submitted constantly so that my body understands that realm. If I got into a ring with a 20-something kid that does kickboxing, does Brazilian jiu-jitsu or catch wrestling and trains it like an animal 4 hours a day, to have the cognitive dissonance that I can go in and just do my kosho and destroy them is ridiculous.
Well, you're also talking about somebody who, we both did this when we were younger. You get face smashed a lot more.
Right.
I don't get my face smashed.
Me neither.
Much
I don't.
anymore.
I like how
It's a
my
conscious
face looks.
decision.
Right.
I can't afford the way
Me
I
neither.
look to have it.
Yeah, exactly.
Have my face smashed on. But you say something really interesting. I think I love this insight. It's one of the things that our mottos, my students is, and it's a little tongue in cheek, right?
Mhm.
But it's train hard, fight lazy.
Right.
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 I have to be able to overcome people who are going to be bigger and stronger than I am. And I'm not going to do it through strength.
Right.
And force, because, well, force in a sense, right? But not physical strength force.
Right.
Right. I'm not going to do it that way. So I have to find other insights.
Mhm.
It's going to be just my only salvation, especially as I get older.
Sure.
But I've always been a smaller person.
Right.
Compared to, when I first started training, I was, I weighed 140 pounds.
Right.
And I'm training with guys who are 6'6" and
Yeah,
to a hard style of karate. Yeah.
Right.
Too, right. And I go, my arms are black.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. But theirs weren't from
Right.
training with.
Right. Yeah. You look like a toothpick.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
But you're right. But that's my point. So I guess that it wasn't so much an epiphany. It was that you talk to any martial artist who, when they started, is doing the martial arts for the same reasons 20 years later that they did when they started, then they missed the boat on a lot of things. And I train for very different reasons now than I did when I started at 11 years old.
Of course.
So I can't really pinpoint an exact moment. I mean, really, the biggest turning point in my training was meeting my Kempo teacher. It was meeting Aikijujitsu, because I'd been doing the Valari system of Kempo, which really was just collecting forms, collecting techniques, doing some sparring, and you get your next rank. But there was no more depth to it. And when I say I was months away for testing for my 3rd degree black belt in that system, and basically was like, I don't want it. I don't even care. Like, I'm not going to test for it, because I'm like, what's the point? This guy that I just started working with the last year or so has given me more in the last year than I did in the 10 years training this art. And I'm like, so what? I'm going to get the rank and do what with it? I don't want to do this art anymore. Yeah. And I wasn't trying to disrespect the art itself. It was really about being unhappy that I hadn't found what I was looking for sooner. And I was really kind of in a transitionary state at that point. The early to mid 90s, I liked Valari Kempo, but I was looking for more. So I went and did a lot of seminars. And the irony is, there was 2 roads I was going to go on, because I met these 2 individuals right around the same time. Or I should say, did seminars. No, I met them. So I met them. Guru Dan and JKD.
Yeah.
And Aikijujitsu.
Yeah.
And I was like, which one do I want to do? And I said, well, I've been doing Kempo for 10 years, and this guy's Kempo, but he's from the original source of the art. I'm going to stick with this. And I just liked Hachi's teaching methodology, because Guru Dan was really doing mostly drills and skills like that, but not teaching the concepts and principles the way Hachi did. So that's what drew me in the direction of studying Kosho. So that was the biggest turning point in my martial arts career, was meeting Aikijujitsu.
I've watched you teach for a lot of years, and I thought you were always an effective teacher, but you're a much more effective teacher now, in my opinion, than you were earlier. As I hope we all are.
Sure.
If not, then I wish.
Well, as an educator, a professional educator, I take that as a very big compliment.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. But there are a lot of instructors out there who don't have your seniority, who are good instructors, who are trying to be better instructors.
Mm-hmm.
As an instructor, speaking to other instructors watching and listening, what's a tip you give them about being a better instructor?
Love what you do, first off. Believe in what you do. And understand that you are not important. The art is what's important. And to effectively pass it on to the next generation, you really do need to be selfless. And you have to have a degree, and you know this as well, being with what you do. You do have to have a degree of ego when you teach, because you have to have that confidence and really believe that what you do has value, not just what you do, but that you can express it. And that's where the ego comes in.
Yeah.
But don't be arrogant about your ego. So try to be humble enough to understand that everything that you've learned is just a collection of all the mistakes you've made, right? I tell my students, I said this recently to them, I go, I don't want you to do it right. I want you to do less things wrong. That's how you improve. So as a teacher, the best...
And actually in martial theory, it's one of the things we talk about is that improve, when we talk about, they talked about Usain Bolt's coach, and they've gone to run faster by having him run less slowly. Right. Because how are you going to make this guy faster?
Right.
You can't, but you can shave off some of the things he's doing that's making him a little slower than he could be if he stopped doing those things.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, and that's what it boils down to, is that if you want to, first of all, if you want to be a good teacher, you have to keep studying.
Yeah.
I cease to have things to teach my students once I stop studying myself.
Yeah.
Because they will eventually catch up. And you know what you do. It's like, if you aren't constantly polishing that stone to get rid of the imperfections and learn more, you're just sitting on a shelf. And eventually those other stones that are getting polished will go on to the next shelf.
Right.
A good example is that when I ran the sword program, because I studied sword, like I said, initially with Carl Long for a while, one of my students, who I noticed getting better at sword than me. And I was the guy teaching class. And so he would start politely making adjustments to what I was teaching. Like, my sensei, I think it's this way. And eventually I was like, he's better at this than I am. So I turned the sword program over to him, because it was unfair to my students to let my ego get in the way and continue teaching in capacity where there was somebody there who understood what was supposed to be done better than me, and they're in the same room. And I was starting to get kind of disenfranchised about the whole sword thing because of some political things that were going on. So I left sword, and he took over, and to this day he's still doing sword.
Yeah.
So be selfless in your training, or selfless in your teaching. Be obsessive in your own study, so that you're constantly learning, so that it allows you to develop your tool set better to present to your students, and really be compassionate when teaching your students. Have the desire for them to get better than you. Because if you're just teaching because you're showing off how good you are, and you're not really teaching people, if your students can't go out on the floor and someone says, that looks like Steve Perlman's student because they're moving like Steve Perlman, and then 5 years from now, I'll be like, that guy's gotten much better. And eventually you want to be like, I think that guy might be better than Steve Perlman.
Yeah.
And he was a student of Steve Perlman. I think that, and we've had this discussion.
Yeah.
And I think any real good teacher, that's the goal, is that their students surpass their understanding and their abilities in the art that you passed on to them. So that's really, is be a selfless teacher and give what you can wholeheartedly.
That's such great advice, because I don't think for many instructors that is their goal, is for their students to get better. They always want to, and in a sense, we all still want to be better than our students, of course, right? But that's not my goal as a teacher. That's my goal as a martial artist, is I want to be better than them. My goal as a teacher is I want them to be better than me. My favorite moments are when a student will articulate something to me better than I did.
Yeah.
I love it. And I love your point as well. I want to circle back to it about embracing mistake. So many times a student of mine will say, oh, I can't get this technique to work. And I'll say, well, yeah, but not for as long as I couldn't get it to work.
Right, exactly.
Right? The reason I can do it better than you is because of how many more mistakes I've made than you have trying to do that technique. And they forget that. I think students forget that we went down that same path. We just did it longer and made more mistakes until we figured it out.
Mhm.
Even though now they're not seeing those type of I still make as many mistakes as I used to.
Sure.
Just different ones.
Right. Exactly.
Hopefully.
Right. Right.
Usually different
Yeah.
one. Last words. Anything that you want to leave for posterity with the martial arts community that's listening?
Yeah. I think that in the advent of, especially in the times that we live in, social media has become a platform that's made a lot of different areas very divisive. Both politics, as we've seen recently.
I've noticed that.
Yeah, I'm sure. Even in your line of work, I'm sure you see, like professional within the educational system, collegiate level.
It's terrible.
And martial arts is no different. People are so busy, excuse my French, shitting on each other rather than looking for commonalities and trying to unify what the martial arts should be. That it's become kind of a toxic environment. And part of that too is that you need to be honest. Like I said earlier, you need to be honest with what you do. Don't be disillusioned. If you're not a combative martial artist, just say, I'm not a combative martial artist.
Yeah.
Don't say, well, the stuff I do is too deadly, so that's why I don't use it in combat. Freely admit, look, I've been doing martial arts for it'll be 41 years in this coming in October, 41 years in October that I've been doing the martial arts. And I've seen all the different patterns and how things change. But it's been 41 years, so I have a lot of knowledge. Like you said, I'm an advanced, like I'm a senior representative of the arts that I teach. But I'm also a senior representative. Like I'm an older guy. So I have no illusion about my fighting ability against somebody who's an athlete. And you have to be honest with yourself, but with your students too. Don't create a God complex, right? There's too many people I see in the martial arts world where the students, they look at them as deities. And that's not what we are. We're human beings. Now, you have to keep that student-teacher relationship, and you got to love your students, but you also have to keep some space between you and your students, because that familiarity breeds contempt. So you can have those boundaries crossed where they think that they're your contemporary, but they're not. You're still their teacher. So you kind of have to have that position. But be honest with what it is that you're doing. Work hard to try to unify all the martial arts. Don't proclaim to do something that you're not doing. Be willing to learn. Be willing to accept the failures that you run into in life, and look for routes to make yourself better. And I think that if you do that, and you're a good representation as a martial artist, that other martial artists of similar character will be drawn to you. And if we can get more people like that, you started the Saratoga Martial Arts Festival. And what we saw was, a lot of those festivals you and I used to go to, you'd see those clashing kind of egos. And SMAF really was kind of this area where you started to see those things kind of fizzle away. And the guys that had those egos and attitudes, they didn't last long.
Well, we didn't invite them back.
Right. But I'm saying that, that's what I mean, is that we wanted people that really were there to train arts and share in the brotherhood and that community of what the martial arts should be. And if we can look at that and see how that parallels to other things in life, it'll make the whole world better. I hate seeing things the way they are now. You and I are older guys, but we're not old guys.
Right.
But we've seen in history how things have changed, and we're in a very, very rough patch of history right now, specifically in our country. And I think within the martial arts community, if we can really kind of pull things together, that will build more bridges for people to kind of put that into other aspects of their life. And that's what we really need as human beings. So
I love that so much. One of the things, and I say this at the end of the book too, I think, I can't give anybody a good reason to train in martial arts unless they're just getting their ass kicked every day.
Right.
But otherwise, everything hurts. a lot of pain. It's shugyo. It's hard training, right? Everything's tough. But the crazy thing about martial arts people, what I love so much about it, especially in the traditional class community it's because where I operate more, that we're all people who are willing to be in pain so the other person can learn.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. That's a certain kind
That's
of
a
character.
sacrifice. Yeah.
That's a sacrifice. So why can't we should be able to be the best people to get along.
Right.
Because look at what we're sacrificing for each other already in the process.
Yeah.
So I'm so glad you ended on that point.
Yeah. And you and I've probably said similar things, but some of the best, greatest people I've met in my life and some of the worst people I've met in my life
Yep.
are in the martial arts world. But that can be said, that can be across the lines in many aspects of life.
Yeah.
But I think that we're lucky. We've met a lot of great people, and you and I are longtime practitioners, and we are a result of our teachers and the people that have been our mentors. And it'd be disrespectful for us not to continue their legacy and pass on the knowledge that we have to the next generation. And that begins with that proper attitude and character that we want to portray as martial artists. So thank you for writing your book. Thanks for your years of friendship and what you've done for the martial arts community. And I appreciate you giving me a platform to spread whatever little knowledge I have to other people and the arts that I teach.
Thank you so much for what you said, and the honor's mine.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good luck with the book.
Thanks.
Please share the work we're doing here with other martial artists, and of course, please subscribe and follow. To see instructors interviewed here demonstrate the theory they discuss, join us at Martial Theory University by going to martialtheoryu.com and make sure you use the discount code MTPodcast for 20% off while it lasts. Finally, if you generally enjoy thinking and want to learn more about it, then please join my Substack, Perlman Actual Intelligence.